Welcome back to another episode of Practice Underwater. This is the second week in our 4-week Matt and George. What do we call this? Episodes of fun. What do we want to call these?
It's just riffraff. That's all.
Riffraff. Yeah, you keep using that word riffraff.
Yeah, it's
Yeah,
just
this is
it's two guys chatting.
two guys chatting,
George is
and
drinking.
I went and got. So Matt was drinking a beer last week, and so here I have my beer with him. And I don't normally do the beer vibe. If you listen to Dental Friends with Benefits, I'm more of a hard liquor guy. But hopefully Richard is okay with the alcohol on the show. It's just a beer.
Right.
We'll keep the language clean still, so we have the clean feed that we like.
So how do these episodes work? Is you talk about the alcohol the first thing you get on? Like what's the format of these things?
So it's very structured, Matt. I think you'd be impressed with the level of structure we have.
I know because it's led by Ashley, so she's probably structuring it.
Oh my gosh! If you think I'm bad.
Oh.
Oh man. I'm the structure guy over there.
Wow. Okay.
So we always call ourselves a goofy name. So like right now in our recording software, I called myself George and you called yourself Matt.
Mm-hmm.
We call ourselves another name and then we talk about what name we called ourselves. Say, hey, today I'm blank, or like, I'll say, hi, I'm blank, and then it's like, why are you blank? And then we tell the story. And then we'll talk about what we're drinking. And then usually we'll make a toast.
Okay.
And then usually we riff for about the first 30 minutes. And then typically the last 30 minutes, it tends to get a little vulnerable and heavy. And then we typically finish with some type of acknowledgement.
Mm-hmm.
And then we'll title the episode at the end of the episode usually. And then we'll see you guys next week. That's typically the routine.
That's really good. I'm not just saying that. That's really cool.
Yeah, it's funny. I'll talk a little bit about, I guess this is riffing, so I'll riff. Matt, we talked a lot about in last week's episode, his growth in his life. And I don't think I talk enough about publicly the role Matt has had in my life. If you think about it, so we subscribe to this book. We run our company based off this book called Traction, which they have this thing called EOS, your entrepreneurial operating system. It's like you operate your computer on Windows. We operate shared practice on EOS. And I operate my practice in a similar way, not as intense. But I take a lot of their meeting stuff and apply it to my office. And, they talk about in the book this visionary integrator dynamic. And it's a really cool dynamic where you have one person in the company who is typically the big picture guy thinking about things and solving, complicated problems. And then you have somebody in the company who is making sure that the things that we talked about are actually happening. And if you couldn't guess between Matt and I who is who, I'm very much a visionary and Matt is very much an integrator. And it's, really, really strong leadership. You have to have strong person at each position. It's not one is more important than the other. And Richard and I, for the first, I don't know how long we did this without you, 2 years, with two visionaries. Mm-hmm. We didn't move very far. We had a lot of great ideas.
Oh, yeah.
But they didn't go very far. And I think, bringing Matt on was a really big thing for us because that was us saying, okay, let's double down on this becoming a legitimate thing. I won't say who, but, somebody kind of made the allusion to me that, shared practices was never really going to be a business. And that stuck to me.
Wow, damn.
Yeah. You know who, though?
It's not coming to my head, but you can tell me off air.
Okay. Yeah, so somebody said that to me, and that hurt. And I think, we both have that thing where when somebody says we can't do something, that typically is like, hey, you made my list, and we don't forget those moments. And that's not the best place to come from, and that's not why we're doing it, but it doesn't mean that doesn't exist in our minds.
Right.
And when we do things, I like to refer back to that list every once in a while. And so that, I have that one on my list. And I think that was when Richard and I said, okay, we're going to bring on a third partner and we're actually going to make this something. And the growth that shared practice, there's really two trajectories of shared practice. There's pre-Matt and post-Matt. And, bringing Matt on was really big because I felt like it, in so many ways, almost unlocked me, if that makes sense. Yep. It's almost like, with you on board, we actually did the things we talked about. And then it allowed me to really be myself. And then it allowed you to be yourself. And so, I think your leadership in our company is so strong. And, your ability to handle all the things, all the moving parts that we have is so impressive on so many levels. And also your ability to empower me to be the best version of myself. Like we talked about that last week, right? Is the support structure that I am in your life, where I let you really do the thing that you wanted and, kind of stood for you. And you almost do the same for me, where you stand for me and help me walk into the uncomfortable parts of being in my role. And yeah, so, I don't know where that came from, but thanks, man.
Yeah, of course. And it's weird to think about that. The things we've implemented with shared practices in the last like year were not new ideas. Like they came from you and Richard
Yeah.
years ago. They just like you didn't get to them quite yet. So I don't know. It's like I'm not the idea guy. I never have been my whole life. I'm not a creative. Like I am a doer. I'm an action guy. I'm an implementer. Like so, it's just being in a company that's I'm surrounded by people who fill my gaps.
Yes.
It's just like so nice. It's like I can't describe how nice that is. That I don't have to like beat my head against a wall and try to be someone I'm not. So thank you for the opportunity just to do what I like doing and contribute the way I know how.
It's such that statement is such a mirror to be surrounded by people who are the things I'm not.
Mhm.
In so many ways, you and Suzanne are really the two people that come to mind when I make that statement. Where or Suzanne, our director of coaching, I would say, Matt, that's our best hire ever.
Oh wow, yeah, she's dynamite. Like holy, and to think of like how you found her and how we didn't know she would be anything.
This good. I had no clue she was going to be this good.
She's something.
Yeah. And to lead a coaching department, the job that takes, and and right, we hired her with this in mind. Like she had led Mercer Advisors, and she was the director of 47 in-office consultants all around the country. Like we knew that she had this experience, but to actually watch somebody with this experience do it again in a different philosophy and take take the thing that we really envisioned and make it happen I told her after watching her train coaches for the first time, leading our coach training for the first time ever. I kind of pulled her aside. And I'm like, oh, this is the first time leading this company that I looked at somebody and said, "You're doing something I totally can't."
Yeah, she's. Like,
And it's incredible.
I've only heard like snippets from this. We're training now 3 coaches under Suzanne, and I've only heard snippets from these sessions. But wow, is she like totally in her element and just
It's incredible.
what she's meant to be doing? And I'm gonna see it this weekend a bit, and I can't wait.
Yeah, it's a whole different world, and I think that goes back to you when you build your team. There's 2 ways you could approach this, and I think Richard and I both kind of tried doing the first way, where you supplement your weaknesses and you work on them, and you become like right. Richard and I both have the problem of getting stuff done, and like he's him and I, we kind of both beat our head against the wall trying to be these people we just aren't. And there's just this unlock that happens in your life when you surround yourself with people who are the thing naturally very strong that you are not. And they are looking for you too. Like Matt and I, we are complete opposites and complements of each other. Yet, I mean, I would say we defer to each other equally, right? Like, I don't think I think the deferral happens both ways. There's times where I'm like, yeah, Matt, like, you got this, you're the boss of this decision. And then there's times where that's the inverse. And I think it's having that trust both ways, where the other person's strengths, like all things financial at shared practice, that's Matt. And I take a back seat to that because I know that's an area where he's strong and I'm weak. And yeah, so I think it's, if I don't know where this came from, but if you're listening in our audience and you're building a team, for me, like my office manager is very similar to Matt and Suzanne. She is very, detail oriented, getting stuff done, checklisty, detail oriented, quiet. And that's exactly what I need. So,
well, that brings up an interesting point because I feel like you might have a doctor like myself, owner dentist, who's an integrator, and
yeah.
and like where is the visionary coming from? Because I feel like it's kind of hard to find an office manager visionary type, a staff member visionary.
So Peyton Keller is somebody that comes to mind. He's one of our interns. He and you have very similar personality traits. You guys are integrators as leaders. And right, the visionary as a leader, it's easy. You get an integrator underneath you to then get the stuff done that you think about.
Mm.
The integrator as a leader, you tend to need coaching a little bit more
Exactly.
for the vision.
Yeah.
You can't rely on a staff member to give you the vision for the practice. That just doesn't work.
Yeah, totally. And like that's having you as my coach has been the best thing for the practice. Like having that visionary on my side, actually looking everything I'm seeing. It's tough in my frame of mind to do that on myself. on my own.
Yeah, and I think coaching, it's not like, I think people think the coach you work with is the most important thing. It's really not. It's a coach. Somebody, it's just the act of looking at somebody's situation objectively
Mm.
without the attachment to it. And it's funny because I I told my staff, anytime I tell them something, I'm like, hey, I'm making some major change. Like, yeah, we saw that coming like well before you did. And it's like sometimes people see you better or more easily than you see yourself. And it doesn't necessarily like, and so, I don't know about your experience with coaching, but at least for me, it's so much easier to look at someone's situation and see the thing that's so obvious than when you're in it. It's
Yeah.
just really hard to, and that's why, right, Matt talked about last episode, he's got his wife who's, my life coach. And then you have, he has his own life coach. And then he has, me as kind of like his friend that he bounced ideas off of and all that stuff. And from my standpoint, I have like 5 people in my department that for different areas of my life I'm talking to. And that's necessary. You need that because you can't really do the things that you want to without it, for sure.
Yeah, because like all these people in your life, the support group you have, they're all not emotionally invested in what you got going on. Like they don't care what's going on in dental practice. They don't care about all the things you make everything mean in your life.
Yes.
They're not affected by that. Like,
and they don't have your childhood trauma, and they don't have like
all
the stuff, and they don't have like, I tell somebody to go have a conversation with some staff member. I don't have the uncomfortable 10-year experience of that person like all over me, and like I can just tell them, hey, this conversation needs to happen, and whatever reason it's not happening, you need to like work on that so that you can have this conversation.
Yeah.
And it's someone to hold you accountable for that. It's really big. So
yeah, I mean, so many conversations I should have had in my first year or two in ownership that I didn't. My own fault, no one else's. But having that person would have been just so nice to like see that in me, see where I was actually getting in my own way that I couldn't see myself.
Mm-hmm. And it's funny, like we take this mantra of metrics and mindset, right? And I almost feel like metrics inform mindset. But I mean, metrics, I think people come to us looking for metrics, and the thing that they always leave with is needing mindset. Yeah. And, I think mindset is really the base of everything.
Think about how much your calls are spent on, I guess, quote unquote, mindset things, like talking to staff members. Like that kind of area is much more the center of a coaching call than actually what are the numbers saying.
Yeah.
Is that the same for you?
Well, and so like, let's talk, in the context of this episode, right? We're talking a solo to group transition. Mm-hmm. So the way this typically looks, if you're coming to our coaching department, is you'll sit down with, our director of coaching and a coach, Suzanne, and we'll go through your practice, and we'll say like, hey, these are the plans, and we'll lay out like the next 9 to 12 months. That's like a big call. And then the check-ins are just like, what is your fears that are getting in the way of doing that thing? Mm-hmm. And then we just got to keep tackling your fears so you stay course. That's really the way this works. And I don't know, I feel like a lot of my calls and a lot of everyone's calls are, why are you upset this month? And, how can we make sure that we stay the course and we keep our eyes on the prize and remind them of, help them see the growth that's happened and help them see the changes that have been made and help them stick to the track. And I think that's a lot of it, right? And then obviously help them manage their fires, right? Staff issues, your AR issues, mm-hmm. all of that stuff gets cleaned up as well. Like, you get the big picture stuff in place, and then you work on the kind of cleaning up of the practice while we're waiting for the growth to bake, and eventually 9 to 12 months later, it's here.
It's like a little turkey in the oven.
Yeah, I use the seeds analogy a lot. So I'll tell people we're planting seeds, or I'll say we're baking for 9 to 12 months, but they have to note that there's a latent period where you're just waiting, and then when it's done, you'll eat it. It's delicious.
And it's good. Yeah. Absolutely.
So Matt, we started this. When did we start? 4 months ago?
Yeah, about June-ish.
Right. And it's funny because Matt and I, you would think that like it's very annoying sometimes hanging out with people who coach. And we all coach, and that has different meanings to different people, but like we advise a lot. And then when we're around each other, we try to put that down. So like, I don't look at Matt's practice and immediately give him advice like I would a consulting relationship or a coaching relationship or whatever, because he's my friend and I just want to enjoy his presence and company and just kind of like work on our shared practice stuff or whatever. So ironically, we don't talk about his practice or my practice a whole lot. I feel like we both look at the other and say like, you'll get the support you need if you need it. And if not, then I'm here if you need me, essentially.
Mm-hmm.
And I think you kind of reached out and you knew that I was developing. So we're building a course called Analytics Based Practice Management, where we outline a lot of the things we talk about. And one of the sections is a solo to group transition, where we outline how to do a solo to group transition. And we kind of look at specific examples with our clients and certain things that we've done in different situations. And you sort of outlined to me, you kind of reached out and you're like, I think I want to do this. So talk about, what was going through your mind and that whole experience for you.
Yeah, I mean, I mentioned last week that the vision was to buy a practice. That was always the vision, and get in there. And then the vision changed, and that's when I opened my eyes to the pivot. And I didn't really know how to make the change myself at the time. Like, I didn't know what things I should be focusing on. So that just led me to reach out to you. And it took me longer than it should have, because it was like I see us as some kind of equals and like this whole thing, when in reality, like, why am I doing this? Like, why not just ask for help when I need help? It was a hurdle to get over. And now looking back, it seems silly, right? Like,
Yeah.
why do I care that George thinks I'm struggling with something, like, whatever? But yeah, I mean, you were the perfect guy to help me in this kind of transition.
Well, I totally get that, right? I talk about it in the other show, but I hired a matchmaker and I'm divorced. And, I had that same thing of like, I would just like somebody to handle this with me and kind of support me in this process and help me make it easier. And I have a lot of shame and judgment and stuff in the way of me asking for help that is getting in the way of that.
Mm-hmm.
And, so I think that's super common. And it's like like I was talking to this guy and what did he say? He goes, like, I see what your coaching department can do for me, but I feel like I don't need it to be successful. And I'm like, no, you don't, probably.
Yeah.
And it's just the reality is your experience of success will be a lot different when you have the proper guidance. And I think, right, we believe in that wholeheartedly because we received that same thing. So yeah, Matt reached out and then so I'm using him as the example because he's like the typical person that comes out. Is typically you'll have, every time we get this, it's either somebody who's buying a practice that is currently doing solo revenues with solo size staff and the solo situation, or it's somebody who has owned a practice for a while as a solo. And like you, they've sort of seen the benefits of a group model and then they want to make a pivot. That's a very common situation. So I kind of just want to walk through the process from like a 10,000 foot view, and then maybe we ask questions. Does that kind of sound like an okay track?
Yeah, go on a rant. Go off, King.
Okay. So when somebody comes to us in our coaching department with a solo to group transition, what typically happens is, we have a strategic meeting and we figure out where are their, and this is where analytics are really helpful. We need to see what are their strengths and weaknesses as a practice. And one thing we look at in particular, we call their patient efficiency. So how efficient is this practice per patient? We look at their new patient flow. We look at their hygiene, how up to date all of their patients are in hygiene. We look at how many operatories they have. We look at how many days they want to work. And so we look at all these factors, and then we sort of start with the end in mind is, one thing that we're really big on. And so we actually get super granular. Like, how many staff do you have on every single specific day?
Can I pause you?
Yes.
This is what struck me about the first conversation I had with George about this move was this granular piece. Like, we were literally starting with, okay, which hygienist is working which days and what are her hours there and what are your hours? Like, that took me by surprise to see how like specific you got from the start. Continue.
And so this is a huge ask me how I know, because I've pivoted so many times in ownership that I've realized the more I have that end picture very clear, the more I know to blend all my future hires, staffing changes, and everything towards that end goal. So yeah, this is something that our coaching department does religiously. And when you and I were having the conversation, I obviously just do what they do. And we had that conversation, and I sort of like, yeah. So anyway, like, what hygienist is what day? And right, you wouldn't expect this from me, right? You think I'd just be talking big picture.
And this is perfect because this is where my mind goes initially. Like, I'm thinking about the details. Like, how is this all going to work out? This is integrator in me. Like, this is right up my alley.
So we had that conversation and we figured out for Matt's practice. And so we look at, there's things we look at, right? We don't just like the end picture is great. So we outline that, right? How many days does he want to work? What days is an associate going to work? How many assistants, front office hygienists do we have on every specific day? We map the whole thing out based on how many ops he has. We have sort of best practices that we keep in mind for every different situation. It's funny because, for example, a 7-op practice, you would do it much differently than an 8-op practice, which you would do much differently than a 6-op practice. Mm-hmm. So the 6, 7, 8-op group and a 5-op group is very challenging. So you almost treat it more like a staggered solo than you do a true group. But the 6, 7, 8 ops, that difference is huge based on your schedules, how many hygienists you have per day, the best practices in those different models. And so, our coaching department, they know well what are best practices for each of those models. And so we sit down with the doc and then we'll say like, hey, like, where are we going? What does it look like? And we'll outline it very clearly, the solo to group transition. So this is what the group looks like. How many days do you want to work? Do you want to work 3 days, 4 days? And for you, initially, you said you had 3. Mm-hmm. And so we painted a picture with 3. And then we said, okay, how many days is your associate working? And then we talked about opening a day and, that whole thing. And so then we started with what we call this point B internally. So we call this point B. And so that's the first step in the whole process, is very clearly, like in extreme amount of detail, outlining a point B. And it's so hard to go any more than that in this show because it depends on your staff, your practice, right? And like maybe you have a hygienist who likes working these specific days. We use that to our advantage. So we get very specific with you and your team and your goals to build that point B. Like, in your case, you had a hygienist who wanted to cut back a day. So we use that situation to then introduce when the third one would work. So it's all of those factors are like, I can't get more specific than that because I don't have an example practice.
Right.
So Matt, do you have any questions about that or anything else you want to add about point B before we go on to the rest of this?
Yeah, I'm just trying to think in like a listener perspective. Just if they're able to know that from the start, like what if they don't know what staff members want to work certain days or whatever it is?
Well, and that's right. That's where we walk them through the situation and we'll ask them those pointed questions. But let me first take you a step back because, and right, we talk about this a lot, but a lot of what we do at Shared Practices is motivated by one of our mistakes. And I would say like 80% of them are my mistakes. Is that fair?
It's the thought leader tax. Like you've had to pay it more than others.
Yeah. But like the reality is like the whole point of our company is to create success faster than I could have achieved it with less mistakes along the way. And so, yeah, I will naturally be the person that eats it in the chin a little bit more than everyone else. And so for me, my very first time, so I'm an owner 3 months in, and this is kind of previewing a webinar I'm going to be doing on October 27th. So I was a new owner and I had my seller told me she's retiring. And I'm like, I'm in month 3 of ownership. And I was expecting to have my seller on board for 12 months. And this is month 3. She says, I'm retiring. How long do you need? And I said, oh, well, insert cuss word here. I at least need till the end of the year. Like at least give me till the end of the year. I'm a new grad. I still haven't gotten my feet under me clinically. And now I'm having to hire an associate. And so, right, she was gone 3 days. I talked to my ex-wife, who was my wife at the time. And, she decided, our days, things got sorted out. And somehow I just came to the conclusion that I was going to hire an associate Monday through Thursday. And I wasn't going to change anything else about anyone else's hours. And I was just going to operate, and I was going to work Tuesday through Thursday, Tuesday, Wednesday, Thursday. I was going to work 3 days. Associate was going to work 4. And then my ex-wife was about to have a baby. So, she was just not going to work. And ironically, that was like her last time in the practice. So then that whole thing happened. And that 2019 was extremely challenging for me because I didn't have the right number of providers working the right hours. I didn't set up the practice properly. I didn't hire the associate for the right times. And I didn't hire the associate super well, in my opinion, either. And man.
So you were a solo, sorry to cut you off, but you were a solo hiring an associate before you were at all ready for a group model.
Yeah. So if you look back at my practice, I had 2 assistants, 2 hygienists, 2 front office, 2 dentists.
That's out of whack. That sounds out of whack.
Yeah, you got that right away, right? Like you heard that, you're like, solo, right?
Right.
First thing that came to your mind, solo.
Yeah, but it's not. This isn't something that's intuitive. Like they may like I don't know. The listener may see 8 ops, 2 hygienists. That
Eight
might be
ops, two dentists. They
right,
see 8 ops, two dentists. They think
right.
group practice,
Yeah,
and we see 2 assistants, 2 hygienists, 2 front office as solo.
definitely.
And so I was confused for a year. Literally, I thought my practice was a group for a year.
Mm-hmm.
And so I'm like, okay, well, I had 2 dentists. Like I had banker mentality. You replace dentist with dentist. Like such a sorry bankers, but you guys are dumb sometimes.
No, let's put CPAs in there too.
CPAs, gosh, oh, if you ever want to piss me off, have me talk to an
Oh
accountant.
man, they're brutal.
The worst. Oh, sorry, my accountant, but oh my gosh, you guys, yeah, practice management advice from an accountant is like, don't listen to it.
Their degrees are bad. But
Yeah,
sorry to rain on that for a
yeah,
second.
jeez, yeah. So right, I was like, replace dentist with dentist. In hindsight, looking back on my practice, if I was working with our coaching department, they would have told me, you're not ready for an associate. You need to hire a third. You need to grow your hygiene department more, and you need to work those days yourself. And your patient efficiency is not quite enough to support an associate. I wish they had told me that.
Mm-hmm.
They did not tell me that. And then on top of that, they would have told me, add a day when you hire an associate. Open Fridays. I didn't do that either.
Yeah,
And
talk about that. Talk about the added capacity when hiring an associate.
so I call this, so what we call it is like you shift gears in a car. So when you're driving a car, you need to, right? If I don't drive stick, this is everything I say is as much as I know about driving stick. When you are shifting gears, you release the gas, you press the clutch, you change the gear, then you release the clutch and press the gas.
That's more than I knew about it. So
yeah, I've done this once. And
I tried, I failed.
I almost broke my friend's car. So, but anyway, so the whole point of that analogy is there's a lot of moving parts at once when you're trying to shift gears.
Mm-hmm.
And same thing with an associate. So typically when you are switching up staff members' hours, you're adding a day. So we try to do a lot of these things along the same timeline as adding that associate. And there's 3 things that are really important. You have to add capacity. You have to add procedures. And if you want, you should cut back days.
So why are these important?
So I'll use them in order. So
Okay.
Adding capacity is the most important of everything, because when you hire an associate, you will inherently have a decreased profitability inherently with the model. Associates tend to be less productive than the owner dentist. You're now paying somebody to do dentistry that you normally would have done, at no expense. So you have to compensate for that by creating an additional revenue source to sort of pay for the associate's income. So the way I did it, my income was like in a third of what it was pre-associate, because I didn't add capacity, I didn't add any procedures, and I did cutback days. I did the cutback days, but I didn't do any of the things that would have allowed me to pay for the cutback days. But when you do it properly, you should make the same money, if not a little bit more. And that adding the extra day is really important to paying for the whole thing.
Because your fixed costs are the same no matter what. Your rent's the same. Everything's the same. The only thing you're adding in that extra day is some staff salaries and paying the associate dentist. Yeah. Very small amount compared to you're not changing any of your fixed costs. It's all you're just maximizing your space more.
And it's funny, Matt, how much of this is another dental CPA? Well, sometimes you want to, the overhead percentage thing.
Oh God. So, can
we roast overhead percentages for a minute?
Yeah, before I do. So I use Kane Waters, and they were very upfront to me, like, hey, anytime you're getting ready to add an associate, let us know. Like we have a lot of expertise with that, and we can help you out. I was like, yeah, sure. If you think I contacted them once in hiring this associate, you're out of your mind. I would never take and I love these guys. I would never take their input on something like this ever.
Oh, ever. Oh, yeah.
So sorry, what did you want me to rant on next?
So the way dentists look at their profitability.
Oh, overhead percentage.
Yes. It's such a broken model.
Oh,
it is such a scarce-minded. It does not support growth. The way dentists think about overhead is one of the most toxic things in our industry, honestly.
Mm-hmm. Mm-hmm.
I couldn't agree. I couldn't say that stronger. Overhead percentages, if you're looking at overhead percentages, if you're looking at multiples of hygiene pay or hours, you're living in the wrong world.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, oh my gosh. No, it's not the the figure that you look at. You look at what is the break even at the end of the month. What is the point I need to outproduce to get profit?
Yes.
And that's the only number you look at.
Almost like Matt, I'm not, you don't have to say it on air, but like if you told me what are my monthly expenses, I'd give you a number and give or take $10,000. That's probably what my practice is going to be spending in a month. You
For
could
sure.
probably say the same. And my income is how much higher collections are than that number.
And given my office is smaller, I could be more accurate with the number than even you could.
Yeah, probably. Could you give it to me, give or take 5,000?
Yeah.
Yeah.
Definitely. I mean,
but
I've looked back over a year and it's 5,000 probably.
Give or take 1,000. Wow.
No, 5,000.
Oh, give or take 5,000. Okay.
Mm-hmm.
But like your production per month and your collections, that's the variable, right?
Mm-hmm.
That's the thing that changes immensely month over month, right? Could you give or take that $5,000 if you historically? No way.
Definitely not.
And your profit is just the difference.
Yeah.
So, they focus so much on it as a percentage, and the percentage is taking into account two variables, right? But there's only one variable here. It's your collections. The thing that's pretty constant is your overhead, if you look at it as a number.
And they probably do that because so many dental business owners don't run it as a business. So their numbers are out of whack on what they spend every month. Yeah, that's probably why they have to dumb down things to that kind of, they probably know it's bogus, but they're like, these people don't know what they're doing. So I'm going to like dumb it down a bunch.
So I talk about it a few times, but I've joined this entrepreneur group that's outside of dentistry, and they all ask me what I do. And when I explain it to them, they kind of say like, why is your company needed? Like, hasn't someone else figured this out yet? And the thing I always say is like, everybody in this industry caters to dentists' terrible mindsets and mentalities.
Mm-hmm.
And right, the way they're consulted, the way their overhead is presented to them, the way their companies sell supplies.
It's training wheels. Like they put training wheels on dentists because they don't think they're good business owners, and
they're right.
More often than not, they're right.
And so it's like, instead of trying to change the dentist's mindset, we're just going to sell to them in a language that they understand. Right. So we're going to sell them a curing light by telling them that they can be more productive by how much time they're saving by curing faster. Or we'll sell them buffering anesthetic because we'll tell them that like all these stupid things that don't matter are like, the way that they sell, because that's things that dentists, their current mindsets understand. And overhead percentages, they can understand. All right, staff, 25 to 30%. Got it. But like, to explain this greater concept that you can actually produce a lot more off of the same number of expenses is a much different, whole another conversation that inquires them to have like some type of abundance mindset, which is just devoid of, doesn't exist. And so, I mean, if you want me to get me ranting on this, I'll rant.
I love, it's right up my alley, but continue.
So when you look at, overhead as a percentage, the idea of an associate, you're not naturally going to think to open Fridays. Right. But when you look at it as a break-even point, you say, well, how much am I adding to my break-even point, and how much revenue is possible as a result of adding this day? You'll quickly see why the Friday is needed. And it's always Friday, in your case, I think it's also Friday actually, but like usually Friday is a day that's closed. So adding that's a very straightforward thing.
The reason this is needed is because, like, as you said, they tend to be lower producing than an owner. Yes. They may add some procedures, but even given that, they're going to be lower producing. So you're going to take that hit unless there's more for them to do. And there's only more for them to do if there's another time for them to do it, hence another day.
And everyone, they tried like talking partnership or all these like band-aids over the associate problem. But it's like, just call a spade, accept an associate for what they are, and work around it so that your practice is profitable anyway. And at the end of the day, right, like you kind of hedge your bets. You open up some capacity, you have some more hygiene running, so you have additional revenue from hygiene. You almost make the associate become productive through a number of exams they're doing, and then you mentor them. Like, but at the end of the day, I'm not expecting the associate. I mean, in my case, I tend to hire for productive associates, but I feel like I'm on level 3 or 4 of owning a practice with associates, so I can tend to feel those things out. Your first one, you're probably not going to get a productive one. My first one wasn't productive. But you learn and you grow, and then you hire better the next time. But you try to set up your practice so that they don't have to be productive. They just have to, it has to be built that way. And I think the contract that we design, the contract that we use, tends to be also to incentivize that productivity and then protect the practice from the times when they're not productive.
Yeah. So they're insulated by the volume they're getting versus maybe their skill or lack of skill at the time of their actual clinical dentistry, and their ability to sell treatment. But continue on to your, solo to group
Yeah, I
transition
totally
model.
lost that. Yeah. Anyway,
Yeah.
so we talked about point B, and we set up the associate schedule, right? We talked about opening the day and all that stuff. Now we go to point A, which is where's the practice currently at, and this is where our analytics come into play. So we use the vision to build what we want it to be, and then we use our our knowledge of practice by numbers and everything that I think we do really well to look at where they currently are at. So how fast can we grow the hygiene department? What's their new patient flow? What is
Wait, talk about those two buckets, because I think that's important for the listeners to understand.
So I
Of
think I need to
where
talk about our avatars first. I don't think we've ever formally talked about productive solo and profitable group.
Go for it.
So we've used these terms on air: productive solo and profitable group. And these are two models that we really do believe in. We think they're sustainable, we think they're profitable, we think they're simple. And we understand, so we have for productive solo and profitable group, there's about 30 or 40 metrics for each group that we know very well. We've studied clients that have been successful in these models, and we've built these avatars. So for example, a productive solo's reappointment rate, we know it's between 85 and 90%. And a group is the same. So there are some things that the models are the same. And there's other things like case acceptance, for example, that a solo just naturally does better than a group. When you don't have an associate doing the exam, you're typically going to have better case acceptance. So we know a solo typically performs higher there. And so when we look at something like overdue recare, or we look at their new patient flow, we compare them to both their current avatar. So if you are coming to us as a solo, we'll compare them to, compared to a solo, your new patient flow is good. But compared to going to a group practice, it's not high enough to support a group practice. So we know that's something we have to work on over the next few months. Or we say your overdue recare percentage, we look at for an opportunity in there. So if we're going to grow our hygiene department, because our point B needs, we have to have more hygiene, then how are we going to do that? Where are we going to get patients from? One area we look is the overdue recare department. And that's where, Suzanne, our director of coaching, is super helpful because she's really great at, her practices that she's coached, they have like some of the highest overdue recare, like they're the most up to date on recare.
Oh, I didn't know that.
Oh,
Wow.
that's one of her, I think, if you looked at her practices, you would say, what are the things they do extremely well? I think they're always like across the board, she's really well rounded, but they tend to really perform extremely well in overdue recare. That's an area where she does extremely well. So,
but it's important to break that down too. Okay. So where do patients come from? Start from dentistry 101. New patients or your existing patients who are overdue. That's the two places you can draw from patients to fill open hygiene spots.
Exactly. Because the challenge is when you expand hygiene, which we always, right? If you listen to the show, how many times have we recommended adding hygiene?
Like, before you get into that, like responsibly expand hygiene. Like, exactly. How do you know you're ready to expand hygiene? These two buckets.
And how do you know that now is the right time? And I talked to Richard about this a few weeks ago, but it's about half. Like half the people come to, we're expanding hygiene. The other half were saying, wait. And, it's you're looking at these areas. So do I have the new patient flow to support expanding hygiene? And do I also have enough patients in my overdue recare pool to expand hygiene? And, we teach our coaches what we call the green light. So how big is your green light? And the other thing we look at is their patient efficiency. So how patient efficient is this practice? So how much revenue are they going to generate from that patient in the chair?
Because that tells us a dollar amount of what that extra patient will bring to the practice.
Yeah. So metric we look at, and I love that PBN doesn't calculate this. That's how I know we're like really advanced, because we have to calculate our own metrics that they don't spit out. And one thing we'll look at is treatment accepted per exam. So every time somebody walks into an exam, how much treatment are they converting? And if they're converting a lot of treatment per exam, then we can be a little bit more aggressive about growing their hygiene department, because then we know that, they're going to maximize that patient, versus if somebody is, and I hate to call out James, but he's one of the least patient efficient docs I have that I know well. And yeah, so for him, we have to be more conservative. We can't be super aggressive about expanding hygiene because he's just taking on this cost. And then he doesn't have every time he walks into exam, it's not lucrative enough for him to pay off that cost. So we have to be more conservative. And so we look at, for that specific client, what are their goals? And then based on these factors, how aggressive can we be in getting there? So is that helpful?
Yeah, for sure. And like it just shows, an ounce of the complexity that goes into making these decisions. Like, I think people hear us talk a bunch and they'll think, if I come to them, they're just going to tell me to expand hygiene because that's the way to grow. but there's so much that goes into that decision and when you're actually ready for that. And all, even bigger than what PBN will show you is our skill as our coaching department of like, no, you are ready, or you're not quite ready, or no, you're definitely ready. Like that is our skill on our side.
Well, the other piece of this is infrastructure. We haven't even talked about that. There's no infrastructure metric on PBN. Like, a client I can think of is shout out to Katie. So you had Katie on air.
Yeah.
You know who I say Katie, that's her avatar. That was her fake name on Practice Underwater, but you know who I'm talking about, right?
Mm-hmm.
Okay. So she has high new patient flow. And when she came on, Katie had no hygienist. And now she's working with us and she now has one hygienist, but realistically, like her hygienist is slammed.
Yeah, I bet.
And she's like,
oh, I'm so happy. I didn't know she got a hygienist. That's great.
Yeah. And she hired a hygienist and that hygienist is slammed. And so what Katie has, the concern that we're bringing to her is we're telling her, well, you don't have the infrastructure in place to support two hygienists. You have one front office. You're like, you have very small staff. Your practice would drown if we added another hygienist right now, or like a new acquisition. Like I have, another person that we were talking to who bought a practice and they're ready for that third hygienist now, but he just bought it. So you can't add it that fast because your staff is going to flip. So you have to get some things in place, get some stability in the front office before you can do that. And so there's so many factors that you have to look at when you go from a solo to group that are not as simple as you might sound. And that's where, that guy that I was talking about, where he said like, I don't need you, or he didn't say that, but he was like, what do I could do it by myself. And you can, but it's how do you know those things? That's the hard part. And right, that's speaking from me who made all those mistakes.
So this is interesting because I'm reading a book now. It's called Psychology of Money. And in it, he says like 80% of our view about money and the role it plays is based on our own experiences.
Oh, really?
When in reality, that's what 0.00001% of what actually is the truth. So it's best to look at like what are the big trends of, in this case, successful dentists. And that is the value of us. We have now seen the trends of a larger group of what works. And that's the kind of advice to follow versus like what you've seen with your eyes.
Well, I mean, look at my situation. I bought my practice, right? I'm like, Matt, I remember you called me a PBN power user. This is before you even joined Shared Practices. Like,
yeah.
I was called from friends at the time you were a friend. You called me a PBN power user. I was a PBN power. Probably there isn't another person out there using Practice by Numbers that understands it to the level that,
maybe Rohit's wife, but that's probably might be it.
I think Rohit okay, and Chris.
Rohit. We'll call it Chris and Rohit.
but to the effect of the practice management knowledge and the PBN knowledge, it's a rare combo. And for a year, I had no clue I was operating a solo practice.
Yeah.
How nuts is that?
Like, I mean, and the sellers didn't know either. They
thought everyone thought this was a group practice. Yeah. And it's funny because my ex-wife heard the episode with me and Richard Bryce said that, and she goes, "What do you mean it was a solo office?" And I had to explain it to her too. Like she owned the practice with me, and she didn't know it either. And so it's I think the thing that we've done that's really unique and special is we've put these in avatars. So now it's funny, like, right, you heard my practice, you're like, that's a solo. Like you got it right away, but I missed it for a year.
Yeah. And
I think the thing is like, neither of us claimed, like this whole episode, Matt just talked about how he accepted his need for help. Like, I don't think any one of us claims to know the answers. I really don't think so. If that's the vibe you get from us, that's wrong. I mean, we ask for help more than you do. But there are things that we have quite figured out, and there's things that we're still struggling with. And I think one thing we have figured out quite well is the avatars, and we know what's a solo, what's a group, and how to get to a group. And you have to compare yourself to the models to see what is average in these models, so you can know where your practice is deficient and then focus on those areas. That focus, the clarity that comes with that, is so powerful.
Yeah, it's the roadmap stuff. That's the biggest value of coaching, is like, I know where I want to go. Now, what are the incremental steps in order to get there?
Yeah.
And so, PBN power user over here, George,
missed it for a year.
I missed it for a long time, and paid the price for it, right?
Yeah.
Like you stalled growth. You invested money in areas you shouldn't have.
Areas, yeah.
Yeah, infrastructure when you didn't need it. Like, so many mistakes that can be avoided.
Yeah, no, saving myself, or obviously, right, we didn't have shared practice coaching, didn't exist when I needed it, but like $30,000 would have saved me not making hundreds of thousands of dollars. Like, it's insane. It is insane. Like, that to me is insane. Like, a whole year of not having that knowledge, is the effect that has on your practice is insane.
Yeah.
And yeah, I mean, I was still successful for that first year. Like, I grew my practice 30 or 40%. But then after I figured that stuff out, I doubled the size of my practice. And we went from in June
In
of
what?
so
Yeah, go ahead.
June of 19 we did 110. June of 20 we did 220.
Damn. That's right after COVID too.
Yeah.
Just no big deal. Doubled the practice in a year.
And then, if you're like, oh, we think that's COVID, like, August, it was like 240 something. Like, it just
Yeah.
it just is that much bigger. And in March pre-COVID was going to be our first month breaking 200. So realistically, I really view it as like a 9-month period where we doubled the practice.
It's crazy.
And that's just from the flip of, okay, now I actually figured out what I have to do. The power of focus on your practice is insane.
Yeah. What to do when?
Yeah, what to do when. Huge. And it's like, if you're looking at this episode, you're like, well, I didn't get any specific tangible advice. It's like, well, I don't have it for you, buddy. Like, I don't know anything about you. And I think
Right.
that's the thing that, we've learned is we don't have generic advice to give, because the generic advice doesn't serve anybody. The generic advice is that you should probably get some advice that's unique to your situation. Like, right? Like, right. Here are the generic things. Is like, you need to figure out point B, what it looks like for you, your vision, get that refined. And then you need to look at your practice, see where you're strong, see where you're weak. And then there's 2 paths you go. One path, you get the associate a little bit sooner, knowing when to get that 3rd hygienist and 4th hygienist eventually, if you're going to a group. And maybe you get the associate first, maybe you get the 3rd hygienist first. That's a decision that needs to be made. And then, at some point you'll get to that 4th hygienist, and that's when it's really great. I want to talk ugly duckling for a minute, though. I think we haven't talked ugly duckling. Mm-hmm. So the 2 dentist, 3 hygienist period, or the 1 dentist, 3 hygienist period.
3 hygienists, yeah.
Either one of those. The 3 hygienist period, we call this ugly duckling, because you have to take on some infrastructure costs, whether it's an office manager or a 3rd hygienist or whatever it is, before you have it's an imbalance. So we really like 4 hygienists, 2 dentists. That's a really healthy ratio. And there's a period to get there where you have to have 3. And we call this ugly duckling because this is, for a business, this is the period where you're investing in the long-term potential of the business, and you're taking it on the chin a little bit in the immediate time. And so it's not that you're not making that much money. It's just your stress is a little bit more than how much you're making from what it was with 2 hygienists and 1 dentist. Either the 3 hygienists, 1 dentist, or the 2 dentists, 3 hygienists. One of those, it's not very profitable. It's not as profitable as it should be for how much stress and infrastructure you had to add.
You got the 2 dentists, 3 hygienists. It's probably a lot less profitable. Or you have the 1 dentist, 3 hygienists. Maybe it's more profitable, but
not as sustainable.
Your day at the office is a mess.
Yeah.
Just constant running around.
And so I've operated. So one thing that people don't know about me is I had a 4.5-month period where I worked by myself with 4 hygienists. And so I really, what we call, I did the patient flow track, what we call it internally. And this was, I mean, it's not as profitable as you think, because you have the infrastructure costs of an office manager, 2 other front office, 4 hygienists, 3 assistants, and I'm the only one producing. Like, it actually is not profitable. I thought it was going to be super profitable, and actually it was not. I learned that lesson. And I remember when I had Ace on the show, he was talking about simplifying his group practice by like scaling back and like being the only dentist. And I'm like, dude, that's not more profitable. That's less profitable and more work. And asked me how I know. So, that either one, ugly duckling is a thing. And you have to be willing to, I think a lot of our coaching, right, we perform well above industry standard. Like, I think at this point, you just say that and we don't apologize. That is factual. Our model performs well above industry standard. And the reason it does is because we push people through an immense amount of discomfort that industry standard would not be able to push through. And ugly duckling, profitability wise, is part of that discomfort. It's like hey, like later you're going to thank me. You'll thank me later. You'll thank me later. And then one day they'll thank us later. And ugly duckling is a very big part of it. And your ability to push through a 6-month period of ugly duckling is going to be crucial.
Yeah, I mean, it's what we always say. Growth is not free. Like there is some kind of discomfort, investment, whatever you want to call it, that you have to go through to get there. Like you're not just going to morph into this 4 hygienists, group practice, 2 doctors, without going through some weird times. Sometimes you're like, I don't know if this is worth it. The whole fears, everything comes up. Like, that's what you got to push through, because there's an end in mind that is so much nicer.
So I got approval to talk about on the webinar on October 27th. I have a few stories we're going to tell of, clients. And the client that did I have a solo client, Ike. I have a solo to group transition, Jason, Katie is what they're called. And then we have the group practice. I haven't asked them yet, so I'll use the word James. But those are three people that have been with us for a long time, and they've been able to see the full process kind of play out. And Jason, Katie, they bought this practice that was doing $600K. So it's like $50 a month. And this was a year ago. So like their 12th month of ownership, they did 147. Yeah,
that is insane.
They tripled it. And so like, right. And they had the right advice at the beginning. So like I grew 30 to 40% in the first year, and they tripled in the first year. And now,
wild.
Coming up on the beginning of the year, we're going to do the full gear switch, and then they'll be full on group in January. And in January, they'll have a practice that'll probably do $2 million in 2021. So if you think about the value, I think they paid, let's call it $500 for that practice. I don't even remember the number. I don't even want to guess, but some price of a $600,000 practice, and a $2 million practice sells for 100% of collections, like pretty much every time. Those are very rare assets.
I don't think the audience knows that. Like, they don't sell at that 75%.
Oh no,
they
a
go
$2 million practice
money.
Sells for $2 million.
Yeah,
if not more.
So that is now quadrupled their investment in that practice in just over 2 years, call it.
So if you look at, right, and I don't want to talk about how much money they have, I'm not going to say that, but like, let's use a hypothetical situation where somebody buys a $600,000 practice and grows it to a $2 million practice, right? Their net worth has increased from, let's just say they paid, I don't even know how much they paid, so I can actually say, like, let's just say they paid 500, a high amount. You just gained $1.5 million of net worth in a year and a half. Like, that's why we really harp on growth. You can spend all your time making however much money you want, but how long is it going to take you to save up that much money? And, but the net worth you get from growing your practice, it's a whole other.
Are you sure we shouldn't be? Wait, what are their percentages of staff though? Like, what are they paying? Supplies, marketing. Like, what are those percentages? We don't want to focus there.
Yeah, no, I think we need to worry about their overhead percentage. Yeah, and right, yeah, there was months where I just told them, like, hey guys, like, you're gonna take it on the chin a little bit here, and we're like, what's your break even? Your break even scales well. That's the only thing we looked at. Does your break even, is your profitability gonna look good? And like last month, right? Like, yeah, they did really well. They're starting to get to the group revenues now. So now they're doing really well. But they took on some early costs, and that's part of this. But I mean, you're coming out financially way ahead, incredibly. And I think from the perspective of somebody, it's like, okay, in a year and a half, and I'm not like, they did this on their own, right? Like, we helped them, but they did this. And now for the next 20, 30 years, they have the practice they want, the lifestyle they want, and they have a high income. Like, you get both. When your practice is bigger, your margins are better. I mean, I don't get. Last thing about overhead that pisses me off is when people say, like, well, when you scale, it's less profitable because it's bigger. It's like, I'm not seeing that. I'm seeing it's the opposite.
It's easier to get to your break-even point in a larger practice.
Yes.
Like, you just blow past that faster.
Blow past it.
That's just a fact.
Yeah. I don't know where that comes from. I really would love to know who started that misnomer of, like, larger practices are less profitable. Once you get past 1.8, your EBITDA margin, like the profit margin, goes up a lot. I don't know who started that, but they're dead wrong. Yeah, whoever started that, yeah, they're dumb. Yeah, I don't know, but anyway, like, and right, I think Matt and I, if we seem abrasive, I think it's because we get annoyed that there's so much terrible advice out there.
Yeah. Just
terrible advice. And people make decisions that impact their life, their happiness, their families, their income, all off of this advice that why is it there? And I think the one thing that we did that's really cool is we looked at dentistry through a fresh set of eyes with our analytics. And we said, okay, what actually matters? How do we actually do this? And I felt like, we made a lot of mistakes in our practices early on, because we didn't follow industry standard and, like advice I was given, I didn't follow. But then I think we learned a lot of things on our own, like the value of meetings and infrastructure and, systems in place, like all of those things I think we learned the hard way. But then also we stumbled upon some things that no one else really stumbled upon. Like I think, we're really innovative in our hygiene philosophy of, growing hygiene departments and retention in those areas. I think we're really innovative. And so, yeah, I almost view it like, the NBA, right? Like we're both basketball fans. Everyone's focusing on your field goal percentage. And then Daryl Morey from the Rockets comes into play and he's like, well, the 3-pointer is worth an extra point. So I'll take a lower field goal percentage, but I'll score more points. And
no, and to use a baseball analogy, it's the money ball.
Yeah.
Like a walk is the same as a single.
Yes.
Like just getting on base matters. That's all that matters. So it's the same thing though. It's like innovative ideas in industries that have been around forever. They come up
with analytics.
And we have with analytics. Exactly.
Yes. And in dentistry, it's like, we thought about these overhead percentages, like field goal percentages or like on base percentages or whatever they looked at in baseball. I don't know baseball that well, but like in reality, it's more about how much you produce and collect than it is about how much your staff overhead percentage is. Like if you think you're growing your practice by looking at your staff overhead percentage, you are so wrong.
Mm-hmm.
Yeah. Geez. I would almost argue that I think that's probably one of the worst pieces of advice people get. That one and the 3 times hygiene pay. I think those are the 2 worst I've heard.
I just laugh at like the Kane Water report I get every year. That's like, these are what percentages are for different practice models. And like that, I'm supposed to look at that and care about it.
And it's like, get me metrics that I can compare and give me metrics that actually matter. And overhead percentages. Yeah. Sorry.
I don't know. So, you say someone listening didn't get a lot of actionable steps. I know if I was listening to this, I would have been writing down a ton of stuff. And I know like we can't customize it to your situation because we don't know all the aspects you're going through. But I think a lot of the general principles are universal.
Well, I think the thing we try to do, and we're going to try to do more of, is we're going to share our experiences, our failures, and the things where we made mistakes. And everyone's going to like, if everyone listening to this, right, we're speaking to thousands of people. Everyone listening to this will take away something different, but you'll take away whatever it is that's necessary for you. And so, we'll leave it up to you. Hopefully I enjoyed this. I'm almost done with my beer. I had a good time and I got to hang out with Matt, who's one of my best friends. So I appreciate you guys listening. This was a lot of fun.
Yeah, this was. I finished my beer 30 minutes ago, but that's all right, George. You're a little bit slower.
You had 2 episodes to drink it.
That's true. No, this was a lot of fun on my end too. And like, this stuff gets me fired up. Like, just negating the bad advice we get and bringing our own spin to it is really what keeps us passionate about constantly innovating and bringing this to you all in a way that Jason, Katie, like, wow, 4 times growth.
Yeah, they're pretty cool.
I'm still baffled by that. And like, I probably, super successful and amazing dentists on their own right. They did it all themselves. They deserve all the credit. But the fact that you were able to be, some part of that is super amazing.
Well, and I think for me, it's like, people come to me wanting to work with me, and it's like, it's the philosophy.
Yeah.
It's the thing that we created that's just different and just better. It's, I'll die on the hill saying that this is the best way to do it, and we believe in high growth, and I think that's our company model, and that's the Solota Group is a high growth model. Like you have to get there quickly. You have to reduce the ugly duckling phase. You have to be aggressive about it. And so, this was fun. And I think, it's an honor to be in this seat. I'll be honest with you. It's a total honor to be able to represent, what we do and to really create a movement, right? I think we're really trying to, like we talk about it, and we'll talk about it more on the webinar, but like, redefining average. Like, I think that's really what we're committed to, is redefining our definition of average in dentistry. We think it's very flawed.
Yeah. It's time for the shakeup in this industry.
Yeah.
And, I'm excited. The next 2 episodes that we do is, again, George and I riffing. We'll be next to each other riffing because I will be at his house.
Yeah.
So that'll be even more fun.
I'm excited, man. I'll see you. We'll be recording in a couple days, and I'll see you then.
Yeah. Awesome.
Thanks for listening to another episode of Practice Underwater. We'll see you guys next week.
If you're interested in one-on-one coaching with either Dr. George Hariri or Dr. Matt Garino, our contact emails are in the show notes.
And if you're interested in being on Practice Underwater as a guest, where we could look at your practice anonymously, you can go ahead and contact the email in the show notes and follow those directions to get on the show. Thanks, and we'll see you guys next week on Practice Underwater.